Nowadays, you can do all sorts of useful things on your phone. Calculate, take pictures, slowly age while you spend all your precious time scrolling. Wait, that's not useful. The thing is, I like making games, so I wondered, could you make a game only using your mobile phone? And that's the question we're gonna answer on this video. Rules are simple. I can only use my phone with no external peripherals for every part of the development process. So I can't even make assets for the game outside of my phone, and I can't look up stuff or watch any tutorials at all. Everything has to be made using what I already know. For this project, I decided I would use the Godot engine, which is also what I use to make games on PC. The reasons, I already kind of know my way around it, and it supposedly has a fully fledged mobile version, though that's what we're gonna test today. So I hope you're not trying to fool me, Godot. Next, I had to decide which game to make, and hear me out. It needed to be something really simple. I'm still learning and struggle with fairly simple projects, even using my desktop computer, so I can't even begin to fathom what would happen should I try to recreate Final Fantasy 15 on my phone. Besides, the point of the video is to see if you can make a game, not if you can get universal acclaim on Metacritic. And yes, all of this was to rationalize why I chose to make a Pong clone. I downloaded Godot directly from their website. The app was almost 700 megabytes though, which was very surprising to me, because the desktop version takes up only about 80 megabytes. I guess they have to include heavy Android related stuff. I created the project, and upon entering the editor, I was very surprised. It was practically identical to Godot on PC, and it ran really well, even considering my phone is pretty old. You could resize different sections of the editor seamlessly, which is very convenient at these smaller screen sizes. Even the asset store worked, but that was enough praise. Time to start working on the game. I created the main game node, which I was gonna use to handle all game logic, by the way, cause Pong is simple enough, so doing that shouldn't be a problem. Then I started adding mesh instances to the scene. These allow me to generate simple shapes without the need to import any images to the game, which is perfect for Pong, cause simple shapes is all we need. I added the puddles and then a black background. However, we needed a way to control the puddles. I went for the simplest alternative: buttons. One above the player that moves the paddle up when pressed, and one below that would do the opposite thing. Then I copied this setup on the other side, cause yes, this is gonna be multiplayer Pong, both because I think local multiplayer is cool and because I am too scared to try doing AI just yet. After this, I made all the buttons fully transparent. Up to this point, I was pretty pleased with the mobile Godot experience. My only complaint being that renaming things was a bit clunky. However, this honeymoon between me and mobile Godot wouldn't last for very long. While using a phone, it's not very typical to type in landscape mode, so I was very happy to discover that you can use portrait mode to code. What I wasn't very pleased with was that I almost couldn't see my code, and also, while in this mode you can't even see the node list or go back and forth between the game and the code, which is something I do often. If there's any way to fix this, I couldn't find it. And remember the rules: I can't watch any tutorials for this project. So back to landscape it was. And here's where the real villain appeared: my keyboard. The one thing I would recommend that you get if you want to make games on your phone is an external keyboard, no doubt, because starting from this point, the real ugly part of mobile development began. The keyboard took literally half the screen, and believe me, half the screen is a lot when your space is so limited. Basically, the only way to see your own code while typing is to keep scrolling on the code window every time you want to add or edit something. Also, why isn't this removed by default in the mobile version? That's if it can even be removed at all. On the PC version, okay, it's not really bad to have it, and it even looks kind of cool when you have a lot of code. On mobile though, it takes up way too much valuable screen space, in my opinion. But enough complaining. I added a function that moves a paddle if you pass which player it is that's moving the paddle, and in what direction it should move. With this, all I had to do was to connect the buttons I had previously created to my code using signals, and make sure every time you pressed one of those buttons, you were executing the correct action that would call the movement function we previously created. I also limited the movement range so that players wouldn't leave the screen. And with this, players could already move. I changed the background color to green, just I was sometimes pressing outside of the game screen accidentally, and when that happened the player wouldn't move at all, so it was confusing. And yeah, I attempted to make the game always cover the whole screen, but let's not talk about that. Then it was time to add the thing that's most important to this game, the ball. I made it so that it always had a direction and a movement speed, and this would be applied to it on every single frame. I created a sort of ready system where the two players have to move before the ball starts moving on each round. It was a very good call, actually, and helped a lot when playing the game with other people. This is the kind of quality of life improvement that doesn't take a ton of time to implement, but contributes a lot to the final game's playability. Then, I made a function that would serve the ball to the player you passed to it. I would later use it to serve it to the player who was scored on, cause I felt that's the fair thing to do. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. For now, the ball would be served randomly, cause we still lack that score system. And yeah, there's a little problem. We have no collisions yet! I created the collisions for the walls, paddles, and ball. While doing it, I used Godot's lock functionality for the first time, which makes it so that you can't move things by mistake. I swear, if that didn't exist, I couldn't have added those collisions. Because you can't begin to imagine how difficult it is to move those collision boxes around with your fingers when you have all that other stuff in the middle. Then I had to create two separate functions. One for when the ball bounces against the walls, and another one for when it bounces against the player, because it's not the same thing. If it's against the player, then its horizontal direction will be inverted, and its vertical direction randomized. Also, it will speed up a little to keep making the game harder each time someone catches the ball. If it instead bounces off the wall, then it's just the vertical direction of the ball that's inverted. The way I could tell what the ball was colliding with, by the way, was by adding the players to a group, and then each time there's a collision, checking if it was with something that belonged to the players group. After this was done, I began working on the score system. First, I created two variables to store the score of each player, and a function that takes care of updating those scores. Then I created two checks to tell the game that if the ball's horizontal position is less than 0, then player 2 is scored, and the opposite is true if said position is greater than the width of the screen, which is 640 pixels for this game. Also, I made a function that restarts the initial position, direction, and speed of the ball that would be executed each time a point is scored. With this, the game loop was already starting to feel complete. I won't lie, I was impressed by how comfortable I got with using Godot on my phone after just a few hours, even if I would have killed to have a physical keyboard. Then, I created two huge labels to display the score of each player and made sure to update them accordingly in code. I decided to make them even bigger because I wanted the score to be really easy to follow. Maybe this is just because of personal trauma though, because when I play ping pong in real life, one of my biggest struggles is being fully focused on the game and remembering the score at the same time. Then I made it so that if a player has 10 points or more and they're more than 2 points ahead of their rival, then they would win the game and the text would be updated accordingly. I even reused my ready system so that after the game is finished, it waits for the two players to move before restarting to start another match. The game was done by this point, but I wanted to give it some more impact, so I went to this website and generated two 8-bit sound effects for the game. One for when the ball bounces against something and another one for when a point is scored. Now here comes what's probably the worst thing I noticed about mobile Godot in my time using it. I couldn't find a way to import assets inside the editor, and I spent a good while looking for it. Maybe it's just me being dumb, but since I couldn't look up anything as per the rules of this challenge, I had to find a way around this newfound limitation. What I did was to directly copy my sound effects to the folder where the game project is stored. I've heard in the past that directly messing with Godot project's file systems outside the editor can be problematic, so I just crossed my fingers and hoped for the best. It worked. thankfully. And now my sound effects were ready to use. By the way, I think now's a good time to mention that I couldn't find any intuitive enough way to close the game while I'm testing it without for some reason closing the entire app. Regardless, I added my sound effects. In the case of the hit sound, I also randomized its pitch a little bit because that one would be playing a lot. And if I didn't do that, then it would probably be very annoying. Also, the sound that played when a point was scored just seemed to fit perfectly to me. I don't know what you guys think, but to me it makes each point feel 100 times more impactful. It's really crazy the difference that adding two simple sound effects can make. Sound design is really one of the most important aspects of any game, in my opinion, and it should be talked about even more. After this, I went and tested the game with real people, and it was actually very fun. I can tell you I'll definitely think about making more local multiplayer games in the future. However, while playing, a very annoying bug became obvious. Discovering what it was and how to solve it was undoubtedly the trickiest part of developing this game. Essentially, what was happening was that sometimes the ball collided with the wall and then immediately collided with the player, even before leaving the collision area of the wall. So this caused the code for when the ball bounces against the player to execute. And since the ball was already inside the wall, the code for when it makes contact with said wall didn't execute again, effectively letting the ball go outside of the screen, beyond our walls. I spent a while trying to come up with a solution, but in the end what I did was to track if the player was currently colliding with the wall, and if that was the case, then I wouldn't let the ball collide with the player until it fully exited the collision area of the wall. In simple terms, it means that I make sure that the collision with the wall always takes priority over collisions with the player, so that they don't overlap in a way that makes the ball escape the screen. With this, the game was finished, and the challenge successfully completed. So I think this pretty much confirms you can indeed make games using a mobile phone only. So now there are even less excuses for you if you want to make games and feel like you can't because you don't have a desktop computer or something like that. Would I recommend using the DOS mobile version? Yeah, of course. It gives you all the amazing features of its desktop counterpart, even if it still's got some areas to improve, and you really should get a physical keyboard if you're able to. The app is even easy on older cell phones like mine, both performance-wise and in terms of battery usage. Let me thank you if you've watched this far. I'm Ruben, and I post videos about game development. Till next time.